It is a top 10 showdown as BYU and Texas Tech square off in Lubbock on Saturday, and this is the biggest game in BYU football history.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider as your host here on this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on today's show, we are talking about the stakes at hand as BYU squares off against Texas Tech in Lubbock with College Game Day in tow. We'll explain what exactly this means for the BYU football program. Then we're going to get into the Big 12 title race. What does BYU have to work with? How much leeway do they have in terms of picking up an L along the way down the stretch here if they want to play in Arlington? We'll delve into that. And then we'll finish up today's show on the basketball front, previewing tonight's showdown as the Cougars open the season in Las Vegas against the Villanova Wildcats. It's all brought to you today by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, so I said it in the open. This is the biggest game in BYU football history, and I don't think I am out of line in saying that. Consider the stakes that are at hand for BYU this weekend when they square off against the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Well, number one, BYU right now is the only undefeated team in the Big 12. In fact, they're the one of only 4 remaining undefeated teams across the entire country. BYU has everything laid out for them right now as they look down the stretch run of this season. Is it going to be easy? No, absolutely not. We are going to see BYU's first ever game as a top 10 ranked team against a fellow top 10 ranked team. You heard that right. It is the first ever top 10 showdown in BYU football history. And also consider the other big games, if you want to call them that, in BYU football history. What other ones measure up against this game? And in fact, this game could be outdone just a few weeks later when they go to Cincinnati, or a few weeks after that if they were to play in the Big 12 title game. But the stakes that are on this game, and crazily enough, yet again, BYU's a decided underdog. In fact, this is one of the biggest underdog lines in BYU's season to date. 10.5 points as of recording of this podcast by our friends over at FanDuel. Double-digit dog Cougars in Lubbock, Texas. But look at where BYU is right now and where they could go. That is why I make the argument that this is the biggest game in BYU football history, because simply put, the stakes, they could not be higher. The only other games that I could think of that would measure up with this game in terms of the stakes on them are the 1984 Holiday Bowl, when BYU rallied to beat Michigan and ultimately won the national title, because obviously BYU was ranked number 1 going into that game and needed to cap their season with a win to get that national title back when the polls decided the national title. Then also, really the only one I could come up with in my mind was the 1997 Cotton Bowl. It was obviously the 1996 BYU football season. It was played January 1, 1997 against Kansas State. BYU finished that season ranked number 5, and had they not lost earlier that season to Washington, they may have found themselves in the national title hunt once again that year. Outside of those games, I don't think there are many others, if any, that measure up against this game as BYU squares off against Texas Tech. BYU number 8, Texas Tech number 9. Both of these teams vying for a chance to play in Arlington, Texas. And the metrics say whoever wins this game on Saturday has better than a 90% chance of playing in Arlington for the Big 12 title game. But also, it's not an eliminator game either, because whichever team loses this game, looking at the metrics I looked at, they have no worse than a 60% chance of rebounding and finding themselves, speaking of the loser, also ending up in Arlington, Texas. So in many respects, this could be a preview of a game a month later down in Arlington at AT&T Stadium, the home of the Dallas Cowboys. There is so much riding on this game for BYU because the national media still feels like they're a little bit wary of the Cougars, and I can understand that. BYU's had to rally 3 different times already in Big 12 play to win games. they routinely don't find a way, it feels like, to blow out their opponents. Unlike other programs, Indiana, their arch rival Utah continues to pound people ever since they lost to BYU. They don't rack up the style points. And I think that's why a lot of the national media continues to kind of pan BYU and a lot of other metrics out there, whether it's predictive analytics, FPI, and the like, they still like Utah's metrics better than they like BYU's. Nonetheless, BYU has everything laid out for them. And that is why I argue this is the biggest game to date in BYU football history. I am excited for. I am absolutely ecstatic to watch what's going to happen this week in the build-up to this game. And then ultimately Saturday morning with College Game Day there in Lubbock, Texas, for the first time, by the way, in 17 years. Lubbock, much like BYU, has not gotten a lot of love in terms of College Game Day coming to town. But this game, it necessitated it, it demanded it. And I was told last week, for those of you who I talked to, had Texas Tech handled their business against Kansas State, BYU and Texas Tech was the College Game Day game of the week, and for good reason. It's on ABC. And yes, those of you like me who are YouTube TV subscribers feel like you have been strong-armed by ESPN and Disney to have to go and buy their app to be able to watch this game. I am hopeful at some point this week there's a resolution when it comes to YouTube TV, because this game, it deserves as many eyes, if not all of the eyes possible on it, because it should be a major ratings draw. It's on network television. Like I said, College Game Day is there. And BYU, now that they stand alone atop the Big 12 conference by virtue of Utah's pasting of Cincinnati on Saturday night, the Cougars, everything, and I mean everything that they have dreamed of to this point in BYU football history, literally since 1984, 41 years ago, literally everything BYU has pined for literally decades since then. Chances to play for a national title, chances to win a Power 4 league, they all ride this week on this game against Texas Tech. Now, what is the path that BYU has to walk now if they want to play in Arlington, Texas? Well, let's just put it this way. There is not a ton of wiggle room for BYU amidst a very difficult three-game stretch down the run here. Three-game stretch down the path here as they face off against Texas Tech, TCU, and Cincinnati in the next 3 weeks. How much leeway, as I mentioned, do they have to, mess one of these up and still play in Arlington, Texas? We'll delve into that next as we continue on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, college football is here, and all of us are having the time of our lives. Tailgates, rivalries, the energy in the stands. There is nothing better, nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than anything else. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I want you guys to give our friends over at Game Time a chance. It's the app that I use and gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees, and what you see is what you pay. It's my favorite part of what they offer. The best part is they have zone deals too. You pick the section, they pick the seats, and you save big along the way. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I have bought tickets, and I want you guys to take the guesswork out of buying your tickets for a college football game or games with our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, it's the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. We are available wherever you get your podcast, so please subscribe, rate and review, share it with your family and friends. Those 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts or the ratings you can give us on Spotify are important. If you're watching this on YouTube, right down here, there's a little thumbs up icon. All you got to do is click that like button. Whether you click it early on in the show, late in the show, the algorithm sees it and it helps us build this audience. So thank you, as always, for your support. And if you have not joined up and been a part of the Locked On Cougars podcast on a daily basis, we like to call you our everydayers, please do so and join us every single day, because there's no better time to be in on all things BYU than with the Locked On Cougars podcast. All right. So BYU is number one in the Big 12 Conference. They have a sterling 8-0 record. They're 5-0 in conference play. They come off a bye week in which we hope that they are relatively healthy, and that's the biggest thing. Is also we'll be monitoring this week is the health status of multiple players, guys like Isaiah Glasker, Jack Kelly, none bigger than LJ Martin, obviously, because of the injury he suffered against Iowa State before the bye week for BYU. We'll have more on that as week progresses, but Where does BYU stand right now with regards to how much leeway or how much wiggle room they have down the stretch here to potentially lose a game and still find themselves playing in Arlington, Texas? Because I think all of us remember last year, BYU started the season 9-0. We're ranked as high as number 6 in the country in the college football playoff rankings, which, by the way, the initial ones will come out tomorrow evening. We'll have full reaction for you guys coming out on that. Don't stay tuned. But you look at it, what does BYU have to do to avoid the pitfalls that befell them last season? Speaking of losing 2 games and finding themselves essentially the odd team out of a wild tiebreaker scenario. Well, the number one thing they can do is win every single game, because with BYU standing alone atop the Big 12, so long as they don't drop a game, there is no tiebreaker scenario to worry about at this point for BYU. Now, that seems a little, far-fetched in many respects, but yet again, BYU's 8-0 on the season. If they drop one game, they are still in very, very good shape. And the biggest question is, who do you drop that game to? As crazy as it sounds, looking at all the tiebreaker scenarios, and let's just put it this way, my head is just spinning right now because I have read, I don't know how many tiebreakers, spreadsheets, all the different things that go into this. The most, if you want to call it, advantageous loss that you could take for BYU would be this week against Texas Tech. Whoa, Jake, what are you saying? No, don't put that bad juju out there. No, I'm not trying to put bad juju out there. What I'm trying to say is, if you are going to take a loss and you're going to lose a game, speaking of the BYU football program, and I can tell you on the interior, BYU has no interest in entertaining any of these thoughts, but I am a second guesser. I am an analyst sitting here analyzing things. But if there is a time for BYU to take a loss, take a little pressure off the team, and then rebound and make a run that finds yourself back in Arlington, Texas, in many respects, losing to the Texas Tech Red Raiders is the best loss you can take. I know that sounds crazy, and BYU being a 10.5-point underdog, it may not be all that crazy for some of you also to entertain that, but just looking at how tiebreaker scenarios would play out, having the tiebreaker lost to Texas Tech while also holding it simultaneously over both Cincinnati and Utah, should you beat Cincinnati in a few weeks' time, that is where BYU still stands very, very strong odds of playing in Arlington, Texas. Second best loss to take at Cincinnati. That obviously comes up in 3 weeks' time. That one, obviously, you'd have the tiebreaker over Texas Tech in addition to Utah, but loses the tiebreaker to Cincinnati. Should Cincinnati not drop another game, and the way that they played against Utah, it looks like they are imminently still beatable, but we'll see how it all shakes out. You would still find yourself in pretty strong contention to play in the Big 12 title game. What you'd need to avoid at all costs is dropping 2 games here. Losing at Texas Tech, losing at Cincinnati, that would put you in a pretty perilous situation where you can find yourself once again, much like last year, finding yourself on the wrong side of let's say a 3 or 4-way tie for a chance to go to the Big 12 title game and find yourself as the odd man or maybe the 4th team out. That is what you want to avoid here for BYU. So the simple fact of life for the BYU football program right now is win and you are in. Number 2, if you're going to lose a game, well, guess what? It may be the best time to do it on national television with a lot of people wanting to downgrade you already. Drop it to Texas Tech, rebound, beat TCU, go to Cincinnati and win, and then finish up on Thanksgiving weekend by pounding UCF and find yourself at 11-1 with a rematch, in theory, against the Texas Tech Red Raiders, with both of you sitting at 11-1 going into that game in Arlington, Texas. In some respects, the Big 12 actually may like that in the best case scenario right there, with both teams being 11-1, because I have reached out to some national college football writers and I have asked them, hey, here's a question for you guys. Let's say we were to have an 11-1 BYU against an 11-1 Texas Tech in Arlington, Texas. Would that give the Big 12 the best shot in your mind to play, to put 2 teams in the college football playoff? And the vast majority that I have talked to, and it's not more than 2 handfuls of people I've talked to so far, but the vast majority have said, by my recollection, that would be, in many respects, the best way for BYU and another team in the Big 12 to represent in the college football playoff with multiple teams from the Big 12 conference. The other thing is the ACC continues to kind of cannibalize itself right now, and should the ACC continue to do what it's doing to itself, could they find themselves with maybe 1 or 0 teams in the college football playoff, thereby giving the Big 12 an extra slot in theory? That also is a theory that was thrown out to me, because you look at what the ACC is doing right now. It seems to be gobbling each other up, much like BYU and the rest of the Big 12 did to each other a season ago. So I break all this down essentially to say that so long as BYU handles their business and doesn't drop more than one game down the stretch here, it looks like you can, tentatively make your plans to be in Arlington, Texas. I look at this as maybe a crazy thing to consider, but I would never in a million years expect BYU to go into a game and say, guys, this is the time to lose, because that's just not in the nature of a college football program. And in fact, be doing yourself a major disservice by allowing that type of thought into your football program if you were to even raise that topic. But the point remains for the BYU football program right now that they have everything laid out in front of them. They have talked often about controlling the controllable. They talked in training camp. Trust me, I did almost every media interview I did during training camp. BYU talked about going from good to great. And what they meant by that was they knew they were a good team a season ago. And you know what a mark of a good team is continuing to find ways to win. And with back-to-back 8-0 starts and back-to-back seasons for the first time in program history, there is no denying that BYU is a good football team. But you want to know what makes a great football team? A, it's playing and potentially winning a Big 12 title, and B, playing for it all. Speaking of making the college football playoff, they know how close they were a season ago. Had they not dropped a game to Kansas, had they not dropped that game to Arizona State, they would have been playing in Arlington, Texas. And I know there are a bunch of you out there, I know who you are, who still had travel plans to go to Arlington that had to do it because they're non-refundable. And it was an absolute gut punch to watch BYU come oh so close to living those dreams a season ago. You know what? Everything that BYU has worked for this season is right there for them right now. They can ill afford to watch it slip through their fingers now, because if they do, you want to have a bunch of Cougar fans who are upset? Well, have yourself 2 years in a row, have everything to play for in front of you, and, gag it away. So to reiterate, win and you're in. If you're going to drop one game, the best time to drop a game in many respects is this week against Texas Tech. And I know that's crazy to consider because none of us want to root for BYU to lose a game. But so long as BYU handles their business and only drops one game down the stretch, it sure looks like BYU should find itself playing in Arlington, Texas. That's the long and short of how things are going to work out, it feels like, for BYU, and a chance to play for a Big 12 title. All right, coming up next, we'll flip over to basketball just for a little bit. BYU men's basketball, led by A.J. DeBonson, Richie Saunders, Kevin Young, and company. They open their season tonight in Las Vegas against the Villanova Wildcats. I know it's like the height of football season. There couldn't be a bigger game on the horizon for BYU football, but nonetheless, here comes BYU basketball. We'll break it down next, give you a little bit of a preview of what to expect down there in Sin City. It's all coming up on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than with our friends over at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand that you're watching, the best part is FanDuel has live bets on everything, who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks, and literally everything in between. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout along the way, and it keeps every game more exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. And even if the NBA is not your thing, you want to put some money on BYU as a 10.5-point underdog. Our friends at FanDuel will take that. BYU against Villanova in basketball, 8.5-point favorites. All of it is available to you by our friends over at FanDuel. They are giving new customers right now $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. As simple as that. Put your $5 bet down. You win $300 extra in your account right away. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with our friends at FanDuel, as they are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not signed up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, get the inside scoop on all things BYU that I've got for you guys, both football and basketball. The kicker is it's just $5 a month to be a part of the group, and you get a 14-day free trial before you're charged a single penny. So if you sign up today, you get all the intel that I've got for you guys in the lead up to the Texas Tech game on Saturday, and also all the way up to TCU a week from Saturday, and it's all for free before you're charged a single dime. So join us today. Link is in the show notes below, or reach out to us via social media, which is squared away as members of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. BYU basketball opens the season tonight in Las Vegas. It's a top tier showdown. I know that Villanova may not be the same level that they were, just a handful of years ago under Jay Wright, winning national titles and the like, but it is still a name opponent and the first of several on BYU's non-conference slate. The biggest thing to know about this game is that BYU basketball, they're ready to rock and roll. Kevin Young, talking to the media on Friday, you could tell that he is just ready to get things going. He talked about the fact that he wants to see college basketball, push more towards an NBA preseason style where you play multiple exhibition games like BYU did against Nebraska and North Carolina. He'd like to say 4, maybe 5 of those type games in the lead up to the start of the season because he's so used to the NBA schedule where you play 82 regular season games and it feels like you have a game almost every other day. Whereas in college basketball, you spend literally month upon months getting yourselves ready against one another to play games once, maybe twice a week. BYU opens up tonight against Villanova. It'd be 7:30 Mountain Time. And I am excited to see how BYU handles things when it comes to going into this matchup, because the biggest thing is the Cougars are a decided favorite in this game. Our friends at FanDuel, as of recording this podcast, have BYU as an 8.5-point favorite. I would actually have them as double-digit favorites. If you look at KenPom ratings, Villanova is number 50, whereas BYU is right in the teens right now, according to our friend Ken Pomeroy. And he also has this as the number 2 game, essentially, of the night in terms of the opening slate of games tonight. There's a lot of, obviously, dog games, money games, and the like. For example, Utah State, they're welcoming Westminster to Utah State up in Logan. Now, Westminster is a local program, but they are Division II. Utah, for example, is hosting San Jose State. So there's not a lot of marquee games out there, and BYU's getting one of them as they play the second game of a doubleheader with Florida, Arizona as the early game, and then obviously BYU and Villanova in the nightcap. And the good news is, by the way, if you're a YouTube TV subscriber, it's on TNT. None of this ESPN nonsense we have to deal with. I'm still a little bit jaded about the fact that YouTube TV is killing me here, but nonetheless, you'll still be able to watch it if you're a YouTube TV subscriber. The other thing is KenPom's rankings right now have BYU as number 18, and I think that's a fair assessment of where BYU stands going into the season. Some of you are saying, well, they're ranked number 8 in the preseason poll, Jake. Yes, they are. But I think that KenPom looks deeper than just perception of this team. What I love about Ken Pomeroy's numbers is they take essentially the whole look at what a roster comprises of, returning production, and he will tell you straight up, because I've known Ken for many, many years, that his numbers early on in a season are going to be skewed heavily simply due to the fact you have a bunch of big whales, for example, going up against a bunch of minnows because they're money games. Games like Villanova are actually games that'll give you a pretty accurate reading in terms of the early run this season for BYU, and I'm looking forward to this. A couple of names to know for Villanova if you want names to know about. I think it's Caden Lewis. He's a top 50 recruit. He's a pretty good player. I don't think he's on the same level as a Rob Wright in terms of point guards because he's a guard for this Villanova team. But I also look at this as a new look Villanova squad because some of you may remember that they fired their head coach Kyle Neptune at the end of last season, or actually may have been early on in the season, but they come in with Kevin Willard, who's the former Maryland coach. And the one thing that I know about what Kevin Willard has done as a coach, he's got very good defensive players, none more so than what we had from Mawit Mag a season ago, because Mawit Mag played 4 years at Maryland for said Kevin Willard, and I think it was Kevin Willard, maybe it wasn't, but nonetheless, you get the point is, no, he was, and I think, no, he wasn't. Kevin Willard, retract all of that. Kevin Willard talked about Mawit Mag, saying that Mawit Mag was the best defender, on-ball defender he had seen in quite some time. So apologies for that gaffe there. But the bigger point is he knows how to coach correct defensive principles, and his teams are kind of built on playing sound defense. Do I expect that with a new-look Villanova squad that he's going to have it all situated by night one? Well, I sure hope not, because that would spell some pretty tough goings for BYU in this game. But at the same time, this BYU team, they're looking forward to getting things going here. I can tell you from what it sounds like, these players are eager to start playing ball. The other player I was going to mention is Bryce Lindsey. He's another guard for Villanova. He was the Sun Belt Freshman of the Year and the Sixth Man of the Year at James Madison last year. A pretty good player in his own right, but there are two players in particular that they do not have, at least due to injuries, according to what Kevin Willard said, is Devin Askew and Zion Stanford. They are both unavailable for tonight's game, and that's a break for BYU, considering Askew averaged 19 points per game for Long Beach State a season ago, and Stanford was Temple's leading scorer last year, averaging 13 points a game. So those are two big guns that Villanova will not have in this game, and that should give BYU, in theory, a pretty decided advantage in this game. And I expect from BYU side of things, it's not going to be perfect. And I would expect in some ways a lot of what we saw against North Carolina, hopefully not with as much dribbling as we saw from guys like Rob Wright III. I want to see Rob be more decisive with the ball in his hands. Use the pick and roll with Kevin Keita. Make sure you dish it off to guys like Richie Saunders and AJ DeBonsa and give them the opportunity to run this offense, because I'm telling you, Rob Wright III is capable of taking over a game in a big moment, but isn't going to take over every possession. I want to see BYU play with the pass. I said it after the North Carolina game. I want to see BYU pass the ball and share it. I think the assist numbers tonight will tell us a lot about how much BYU took out of that North Carolina game and how much they've implemented in the time they've had to practice leading up to this opener against Villanova. Because if they have let's say 20 plus assists on, let's say it's 25 or 30 made field goals, that's a good number. Now, if it's in the teens, that's a little different. That's more of what we kind of saw with the one-on-one ISO ball from AJ and Rob that we saw a lot of the time against North Carolina. I'm not saying the ISO ball doesn't have its place, because there are going to be instances this season that BYU is going to need guys who can just simply generate a shot. And that's what AJ and Rob Wright III are there for, because they're capable of generating said offense. But this is a team, speaking of Kevin Young's program, that if last year's any indication, what we saw last year was a team that played as a team and went as a team. If they can do that, I got faith that BYU is going to handle their business and be very, very good in this game, and also very, very good this season. But it all starts tonight. Villanova and BYU in Las Vegas, and I'll be tuned in at 7:30 watching the Cougars play, and we'll do a postcast immediately after this game to give you guys my initial thoughts on what I took away from the season opener for BYU. It's just hopefully that they're 1-0 after that game goes final. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the show. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to talk with Chris Level of Locked On Texas Tech. Yes, it's early in the week to do a crossover edition of the show, but Chris is a very busy man, as am I, and it's a big week, so we figured, let's get it out of the way early, and we'll have that for you guys bright and early tomorrow morning, talking all things BYU and Texas Tech from both of our respective positions on this game. But huge week ahead. BYU basketball in action, obviously the huge game with BYU football, and we'll have it all covered for you guys every single day right here on Locked On Cougars. So as always, please continue to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have not done so already on YouTube, click that like button right now, thumbs up. Even at the end of the show, it still helps the algorithm out. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and we'll catch you guys again tomorrow. All of you everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.